You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today we're going to continue our new series for the new year, otherwise known as Fables for Grown-Ups, on the assumption that everybody is a bit, wiped out from the holidays and the weather, which is to say climate change, and the wars, which is to say politics, and now the political campaigns, which is to say, I can't say it over the radio, and that everybody's rather desperate for a break, a whiff of fresh air, a change. These aren't just the January, February doldrums. Maybe something positive. Now that may seem fictional, of course, which means that we most probably have to resort to, fiction. So, as I warned you last week, apparently to your pleasure, although we will be returning to news when there is real news and not just filler, we are going to indulge ourselves in some fiction, some short stories from my book Parallax. The one this week is particularly fitting for the new year, when we all make resolutions, and in fact make lists of our resolutions, because that makes us feel extremely competent and on top of things, doesn't it? Yeah. Whether we keep the resolutions, or whether we lose the lists, this story seems to try, at least, to address the heart of the matter, and I hope you enjoy it. I call it The List Keeper. And after the next short break, we will return with that story, uncut. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
This story is called The List Keeper, and is from Parallax, my book published by Spinifex Press. The List Keeper. Once, far from here, there was a mountain village known for its spring splendor of azaleas and laurel. Sometimes city people would travel there for a brief holiday, just to take in the brilliant, fragrant display. But there were no fitting accommodations, only a small, rather primitive inn, so visitors rarely stayed the night, retreating instead to the nearest district center. Since flower-gazing idlers disrupted village work rhythms, the locals did little to encourage the tourists to remain. It was a busy village, what with herding the goats up mountain for months at a time, and fishing the river, and tending what crops could be coaxed to grow in the terraced, rocky soil. No one wanted to be bothered with record-keeping. Yet everyone knew that such drudgery needed to be done for the good of all. Who had planted what and where, how such and such got traded from this one to that one, what inheritances did the dying leave, and to whom, who got betrothed or wed, who left whose household, taking what with them, who was born, who died. So the village employed a woman, 40 or so years alive, although she looked older, as their list keeper. She had first appeared as a floral-seeking tourist, but stayed on when the others left. She put up at the inn without complaining about its missing amenities, and she went about notating what species of flower grew where, listing various varieties of laurel, charting the crisp reds, sunrise pinks, and flaxy whites of the azaleas, apparently for her own pleasure. No one asked about her life, nor was she forthcoming. She seemed to have little or no attachment to any former existence, which the villagers assumed must have been back in the city. Eventually, impressed by her quiet diligence and bereft of list-keeping services by the recent death of the elder who had performed this task, the villagers posed the issue of her becoming their list-keeper. She accepted. They were surprised, but it was harvest time, so they hired her and then promptly forgot her. As her stipend, the list-keeper was given the use of a small hut at the edge of the village, what food she needed, hewn firewood, and candles, ink, pens, and ledgers ordered from the city or acquired from the rare passing caravan. She led a fairly solitary life. The schoolteacher sometimes visited to chat briefly, and the village waif would stop by, eager for any bits of food. But in fact, she remained an outsider, despite having now dwelt in the village for more than a decade. This was due less to any unease the villagers might have felt about her unknown past, had they been sufficiently interested, than to two conflicting factors in the present. She performed what the villagers regarded as menial labor, yet she carried herself as if her work were of the greatest import. To the villagers, it was inconceivable that such devotion could be felt by anyone about creating anything inedible, unwearable, or uninhabitable. Nor did they spend much time reflecting on this. Meanwhile, she held herself apart, and the villagers didn't care, so long as she worked hard, which seemed to suit her. She dutifully kept track of all items, acts, transactions, pledges, promises, and dates she was supposed to catalog. Unlike her predecessors, she actually expanded the job. For clarity, she added categories, then subcategories, and she kept special calendar notations alerting her when she was supposed to remind who about what. She shelved the many separate ledgers in an orderly fashion, building an archive year after year, each ledger filled with her neat, small, evenly formed letters and numbers, columned side by side down each page. No errors, no crossing out, no blots, a work of beauty. She also kept a secret ledger wherein she listed her private thoughts. One entry read, "A list is a memory fossil." The first writing ever discovered was a numbering of market goods, an inventory, a list. Lists inspire specificity. They notate time. Perhaps they create time because they are sequenced. Lists bestow deep satisfaction due to their potential for being checked off. Sometimes they even invite the later addition of already noted items or already accomplished tasks just for the pleasure of checking them off. I could stand in one place my whole life and not be able to list everything around me. I could be rooted in a square, waiting for massive gates to pour forth such plenitude of understanding as to make keeping track irrelevant. Or I could be drifting in a whirl of river so swift its eddies are unlistable. Or I could be listing all the questions I haven't yet thought of, or trying to keep track of all the temptations I have not yet resisted. The lists are there, whether I can find them or not. People have fought, killed, and died because of whose name was found on certain lists, or not found. Lists are everything. Rational thought, alphabets, history, science, mathematics, music, relationships, recipes, vows. All art is comprised of lists and intervals. My kind, list keepers, we are artists. It's a shame, really. People ought to give us more credit. Another of her entries read, "There are list makers and list keepers. They are not necessarily the same. List makers do not always keep faith with what they've been noting down. At their extreme, list makers can order others to do things, assuming that others exist to obey. List keepers, however, do not always show imagination worthy of interpreting what lists require. At their extreme, list keepers can be content carrying out orders. Fortunately, I am both a maker and a keeper. I must never take such responsibility lightly. Another entry read, "Ours is not a quest to acquire or control. We make lists against chaos, to remember, analyze, understand, to share knowledge, even if it is the knowledge of chaos. Other people keep lists of what needs doing, then do it. For me, keeping lists is the doing. Anything else is superfluous." Another entry. "Babies and young children love lists. They know lists help you remember. They know lists are funny. They know lists are sing-song playthings. Old people, as they peel off minor memories, become expert list makers. Snuff out the candle, bring in the shawl. Keep a list of the places where you might have put your lists. They often make lists of what happened to their lives so that others won't forget them. Remembering is a social act. I fear being forgotten so long as I myself remember me. But once I no longer can, why would I care what anyone else remembers?" Women keep lists. A lot. If women didn't keep lists, everything would never get started, let alone done. Young men should keep more lists. It would be better off for everyone if they did. Day in and year out, the list keeper went her rounds, collecting information, classifying it, cataloging it. This increasingly demanded that she notice all the time. It demanded that she notice what was noticeable and what was not always noticeable. She could not help noticing. In fact, noticing had become her way of being. But in order to notice what required listing, she also had to notice what didn't. She had to notice what starts before, exists outside of, spills over from, borders next to, and follows after, whatever gets judged list-worthy. Of these discards, she found herself making lists. She noticed she was doing this despite awareness of it being a hopeless task. But it felt intensely important, recognizing those unaccounted-for acts, acknowledging those discarded realities, like sweeping a courtyard that would merely get dust and dirt streaked again, or washing a bowl merely to fill it with food again, merely for the food to be eaten, merely again to wash the bowl. Trying to make lists of the discards made her realize how truly rare an only is. So she began to make a list of onlys. Because it was a short list, it took more time to compile than a long one. Even so, every entry, the uniqueness of each snowflake, for instance, wound up sharing so much commonality, a snowfall, for example, that she wasn't at all certain what could accurately be defined as an only. Indeed, if onlyness was a characteristic every only had in common with every other only, then how could it truly be an only? She worked well into the night, falling asleep over her ledger. The next day, she realized that it all came down to choice. It came down to the judgment of what and how to list whatever and however, since no one of her kind, could possibly list everything anyway. This realization about choice temporarily paralyzed her thoughts. but the habit of discipline was so strong in her that she began listing the variant ways she might choose to exercise such choice. She wrote in her private ledger, "I have been listing the wrong things. Shovels and coins, linen lengths, acreage, debts and payments, people's opinions. That's absurd. I have been scribbling my lists off at the edges and corners, while major occurrences are eternally happening at the center. I should be listing eternals. I should be listing stars in the firmament, breaths inhaled and exhaled in a moment, an hour, a single day. Dreams. I should be listing dreams. Shadows, hiccups, types of laughter. I should be listing the unlistable. I should—" She never finished that entry. This was because the third day, while pondering eternals, she fell into the dizzying insight that each eternal she could manage to notice would, if noticed closely, fade toward its own time in which to vanish. This epiphany ricocheted her back against the ultimate victory of chaos. The list keeper began to shiver. As an act of will to calm her trembling hands, she hated erasures and wouldn't tolerate blots. She started listing the multitudinous ways in which chaos inevitably erodes order. Then she had a staggering revelation. She wrote in her private ledger, "There are no eternals, or else eternals are not eternal. They don't exist, at least not eternally. Only chaos might be eternal. But that would be a kind of order. I suspect that even an order of chaos is denied us. But who would do the denying? To posit denial at all is to impose purpose and blind oneself to chaos. Yet if there are no eternals, except possibly chaos, it means the only items that lists can ever record are endless categories of ending, of burning away, of dying." She stopped, pen in midair. Her hand began to shake violently. But she forced herself. She wrote, slowly, deliberately, "All I really do is keep track of loss." She burst into sobs. She keened. She mourned and rocked herself, overwhelmed by cumulative, incalculable loss. Devastated by loss, mourning all the items on all the lists that could not be listed, and all the items on all the lists that could be listed, but to no purpose except the exercise of listing them. A mountain wind sprang up and bore the sound of her lament up high away from the village. No one heard her. It was more than a week, in fact, for the villagers to notice her absence. 2 neighbors fell to blows, quarreling over who had borrowed whose grappling hook. One herder had forgotten the date he'd put the rams in with the ewes for tupping, and a farmer couldn't recall which paddock he had planned to leave fallow for hay. The village sage, also its vintner and its drunk, old uncle as he'd been called by generations who'd never learned his name, had perished in a blissful stupor and been given a rowdy, though unregistered, funeral. Everyone was waiting for their collective memories' custodian to tally, record, check, change, or consult something, waiting for the appearance of their list keeper on her usual rounds, to collect information or requests for it, to offer answers, to remind them of whatever it was they needed to remember. They waited, despite a growing discomfort that no one had noticed or could recollect when her visits took place. But it didn't matter much, because they were certain those visits had been consistent and reliable, although admittedly not always welcome, because she could be so picky about exactitude, so willing to correct approximations. Still, it turned out that she did possess a strong memory, to which she could commit many details, which meant that often she could answer questions on the spot during her rounds without having to consult the archived ledgers. This capacity, resulting in the speed and convenience of an immediate response, was much appreciated by the villagers, and even when her professional recollections differed from their own, they chose to respect hers, assuming hers were validated by the ledgers. Shrewd in their simplicity, they also knew that a village lacking records was fertile for the growth of misunderstandings and broken promises, for arguments smoldering into fights that flared into feuds, confusion at best, enmity at worst. Yet now, when they asked after her, no one had seen her. Finally, the village council decided someone must look in on their list-keeper. The affable midwife was everyone's choice. But when that old woman knocked at the door, there was no answer. Gently she nudged it open, the village scorned locks, and spied a whirlwind of objects scattered on the floor before her. Pens, crusted pools of dried ink, torn leaves of paper, overturned cups, a comb, kicked off slippers. Then, raising her lamp and peering into the darkness, she saw a figure hunched in a corner, moaning. "My poor child," she exclaimed, shuffling toward the huddled shape. "What She stopped in her tracks as the list-keeper raised her head. That face was a dazzle of pain, tear and ink-streaked, swollen by grief. Weeping had rinsed all brightness from those eyes. "Rhododendrus ponticum 5-petaled, tapping time candles 2 ounces newborn," the list-keeper whispered urgently, tugging at the old woman's sleeve with ink-splashed fingers. "Who pastures betrothed musical notes not nothing? Add it up. Choices, oh, how end, where begin? Catalogue, dogmatism, wise child, slain, rain, pain, cannot, oh, 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 oh." She broke out sobbing. Wait, my dear, I cannot understand you," murmured the old woman. She reached toward the list-keeper's despair, but the younger woman's arms were flailing so wildly that her visitor stepped back, wincing. Yet the list-keeper kept on babbling through her tears. "Stop too soon, everything never gets started, yet endings. How have I, where have I lost it? The list of the lists of everything lost." "Child, you must calm down. How did—" "It's a wedding, it's a bedding, it's a breath, it's a death," the list-keeper sang. Oh, she implored, "want to be calm, not care, not notice. Fuchsia, future, rapture, rupture, who knew this, said that. Stole it, said it, sold it, hid it, fed it, sold it, stole it, hid it, fed it, hated, loved it, hurt it, killed it. No ink, no matter, mutter, blood, marks, keep track, cannot keep track, lost, lost." Finally she subsided, whimpering with exhaustion, and allowed the old woman to enfold her. They sat that way a long time. The villagers met and discussed what was to be done. It was obvious that the stricken list-keeper would require time to regain her senses, if she ever did. The midwife argued that the list-keeper had now quieted down and seemed almost content, sitting day-long outside her little cabin, watching with close attention how a particular tuft of grasses grew there. Certainly she did no harm. But other villagers maintained that she no longer performed the task she had been hired for, so why should they feed, house, and support her to watch grass grow? No, they needed to find and engage someone else to do the clerkish, irritatingly necessary labor of list-keeping, since their from-the-city list-keeper, which is how they now derisively referred to her, had gone mad with her own inflated importance, or else was simply too lazy to do her job. The villagers were in no way a cruel people, but they found this dramatic situation disorienting. Thanks to her self-indulgent collapse, they complained to one another, the whole village was suffering. Quarrels spread and deepened over promises broken, over possessions, over differing interpretations of paddock fencing measures, even over the wording of old Uncle's axioms, his sole legacy. With no list keeper to consult, suppressed animosities surfaced, while fresh antagonisms took root. At last, the near murder of one villager by a neighbor over land boundaries served as a sobering crisis. The villagers needed to employ a new list keeper swiftly. But that could not be done without first formally disengaging the one they already had. No one knew why this tradition was observed, though some thought it was plain practicality to protect the village from having to support more than one hired person at a time. Still, it seemed a decent enough rule. Besides, the elders said, it had always been done this way, and the village had enough problems without breaking precedent as well. So what was to be done with her? Really, she should not have to be their responsibility. It was not fair. After all, she had interjected herself into their lives, had imposed herself on them when they happened to need a list keeper. She should be shipped back to the city, though they had no idea where to in the city, or indeed if she had come from there in the first place. The old women's advice prevailed. The midwife knew of a healer in a neighboring district who had over years built a haven for the sick, the mad, and the needy. The community welcomed everyone, though mostly women and children wound up there. That was where the list keeper would be sent. And so she was, accompanied by the midwife, who, on her return, reported that her charge had gone peaceably, chattering of tulips and turnips, laughing quietly or singing to herself, counting her footsteps as she walked. What later became of her the residents of the village never knew. But since she wasn't there to remind them, they soon forgot to wonder about it. That was The List Keeper, my short story from the book Parallax, published by Spinifex Press. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burden. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.